stayed up all night. I got a call that this had happened. I knew it was going to happen in advance. And we had a situation where it was a lot of hot news. The president had been briefed, as had the Secretary of Defense.
I first heard about Jessica Lynch when my phone rang at 3 in the morning.
We alerted the press to get her for an announcement. They didn't know what was coming.
We thought they caught Saddam Hussein or something like that.
Coalition forces have conducted a successful rescue mission of a U.S. Army prisoner of war held captive in Iraq.
Jessica is a 19-year-old clerk taken prisoner when her maintenance team took a wrong turning and was ambushed. 9 of her comrades were killed.
Let's go! 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 Go!
With Jessica's life in peril, a snatch squad was sent in to take her from her hospital bed in Nasiriyah. They took fire on their way in and out of the building, a military video team capturing every step in the action. These pictures were rushed out for breakfast shows in America just when the news was bad and the talk was of a long, hard campaign.
Saving Private Lynch, the dramatic rescue of a POW.
It was a classic joint operation done by some of our nation's finest warriors who are dedicated to never leaving a comrade behind. At this point, she is safe. She's been retrieved. As to who was holding her, the regime was holding her.
The story was a gift to a grateful media. There was barely a mention of Jessica's fallen comrades, whose bodies had been retrieved from shallow graves during the same mission. A bad story had become a good one.
There are reports in the Washington Post today that Private Lynch fought valiantly, that she shot until she ran out of ammunition, shot several Iraqi soldiers, even though she herself had been wounded.
Yes, Natalie, Private Ryan will be treated in Germany after being in the hands of the Iraqi regime for 10 days.
Did he say Private Ryan?
Oh, ma'am, I never questioned that she was never alive. I knew she was alive and well the whole time.
Oh, it's just unbelievable what I really want to say to her. She's been missed and loved.
Now we're told she had stab and bullet wounds. An Iraqi witness had told the Americans he had seen Jessica slapped in the hospital.
Good afternoon. We are certainly grateful for the brilliant and courageous rescue of PFC Jessica Lynch, who was being held by Iraqi forces in what they called a hospital.
That's the story as seen through American eyes. 2 weeks ago, we visited the scene of Jessica's rescue. Although Iraqi forces had occupied part of it, this was a hospital like any other.
At the beginning, I received her in the casualty department from the Iraqi security department, which referred from the military hospital.
This is one of the doctors who treated Jessica when she was brought here, still unconscious, by Iraqi soldiers. They put her in the only specialist bed they had.
I examined her. I see her have broken arm and broken thigh with dislocated ankle. Then we do another examination. There is no shooting, no bullet inside her body, no stab wound, no another thing, merely as RTA, or road traffic accident.
One story, 2 versions of the truth. The doctors say they operated on her to reset her plaster, the best treatment they could provide in the midst of war.
We give her 3 bottles of blood. Yes, we give her 2 of them are from the medical staff because there is no blood at this time.
We consider Jessica not as a prisoner. We consider Jessica as one of our injured patients, one of Iraqi women which injured in the war.
She was assigned one of only 2 nurses on the floor.
She herself was asked about her treatment. I was like a mother to her, and she my daughter. We treated her well.
The doctors told us that the day before the special forces swooped on the hospital, the Iraqi military had fled. Did the Americans know this? We found a man who saw an advance party land in the town. He says he was questioned by the team's translator.
He said, where is Saddam Hospital? I said, in that direction. He said, are there any Fedayeen over there? I said, no, there aren't any. There is no force in there or anything.
All the same, America's finest warriors descended on the building.
We hear the noise of helicopter, the sound of helicopter, and I think that the helicopter land here on the grass.
Like a film of Hollywood, they cry and go, 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 shouters, go, 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 with guns and with the planks, without bullets, planks and sound of explosion, and broken the door. We are very scary.
We are surprised at that time why they do this. There is no military, no Iraqi soldier in the hospital.
But the Americans took no chances, restraining doctors and a patient who was handcuffed to this bed frame.
And also the other hand, I don't know why they tied him. Why tied him? He cannot move. Why the American army tied him?
There was one more twist. 2 days before the snatch squad arrived, the doctor had arranged to deliver Jessica to the Americans in an ambulance.
Every time I want to go home, I want to go home. We told her, I separately, secretly, in between I and she, I told her, I will try to escape you to American army, but I will do this very secretly because I lose my life. We put her in the ambulance with the driver and the worker of the hospital. Then we told him, go to American checkpoint. When he be near the American checkpoint, he shoot it by the American.
So a tense encounter, no Iraqi troops. The Americans almost killing their prize catch by mistake. But the story had already passed into folklore.
They make a show for the American attack for the hospital. Action movies. Like Sylvester Stallone or like Jackie Chan, doing jumping and with shouting, walking the door, with the photos.
We asked the Pentagon to release the full videotape of the rescue, rather than its 5-minute edited version, to clear up any discrepancies. It declined. Was there any resistance as the forces were going in?
I think that I will leave that story to be told in great detail when the time is right.
What injuries did she sustain?
Well, I'm not going to get into the specific injuries that she received. That's up to her and her doctors to discuss at the appropriate time.
Doctors now say she has no memory of the whole episode, and probably never will.
I understand that there's some conflicting information out there, and in due time, the full story will be told, I'm sure.
There are facts, and there is a message. George Bush and Tony Blair knew how vital it was to get the message right, to present the war and the case for war. This is how it worked. Talk up the dangers.
The United States of America will not permit the world's most dangerous regimes to threaten us with the world's most destructive weapons.
Dismiss the doubters. Appeal to the hearts and minds. Trust us.
I do not seek unpopularity as a badge of honor, but sometimes it is the price of leadership.
Months of preparation over, the war media strategy was ready. The most important part of the plan was to embed 600 journalists with the military. It was a huge gamble. The idea was that star correspondents would live every minute with the troops as they advanced across the desert. New technology would allow the TV crews to beam the pictures and their observations back home, live.
Wreak havoc and unleash the dogs of war. And there they start moving into Iraq.
John, I don't think any of us have ever seen anything like this. Live, real-time pictures of an army moving forward in a battle zone.
The battle for Basra is still raging along this road.
We got rockets coming in on us. Tom, we're under attack right now.
There are substantial American forces close to the Iraqi capital.
Well, I think pictures do a lot to help tell the story, and we embedded nearly 100 cameras across the battlefield, and because I think images are important. I think they're even more important in certain parts of the world where language can be a barrier.
Brian Whitman was in charge of the Pentagon's media planning. His strategy paper puts shaping world opinion as priority number one.
This holds true for the U.S. public and publics in countries where we conduct operations whose perceptions of us can affect the cost and duration of our involvement.
Present the words and pictures properly, use journalists effectively, and victory will come more quickly.
To the extent that the media are able to inform the world about what's going on, to the extent that having an accurate representation of facts that exist on the battlefield, if that causes an enemy to capitulate sooner, then that's good.
He provides hints for getting the best pictures.
Use of lipstick and helmet-mounted cameras on combat sorties is approved and encouraged to the greatest extent possible.
We got to get this cargo up front. The sooner we get to the grunts, the sooner they can kill some of these people that need killing, the sooner we can go home.
I was assigned to be the television embed with the U.S. Army's 3rd Squadron, 7th Cavalry.
Everything hints to a change in focus coming in the coming days and weeks on Baghdad. Baghdad will be the end game.
That was fun. It was a good assignment traveling with a unit which was the tip of the spear. There was a real sense of awe watching this military sweep unfold before you, and you knew that there was nothing that the other side could put in your path which would stop you.
It seems the gunfire has been coming from the police station down here, and there are reports of gunmen positioned on some of the rooftops.
We happened to be with a unit, 40 Commando, who actually had something to do. And it meant we had some very, very productive periods with a lot of great action footage because he put us right at the front. And the work that we produced is some of the stuff that some people say is the best of the war.
The idea of embedding reporters had been tried out for a reality TV series called Profiles from the Front Line, which followed US forces in Afghanistan. Donald Rumsfeld personally backed it. The show ran during the run-up to the Iraq War, and the Pentagon liked what it saw.
What Profiles does is, again, it provides a very human look at the challenges that are presented when you're dealing in these very difficult situations.
Good morning, Republican Guard for the United States Marines. Hoorah!
Profiles from the Front Line was aired in the US on the eve of war in Iraq. Its popularity with viewers suggested to the Pentagon that a similar approach would go down well once the real fighting began, as long as the embedded reporters played their part.
A call came in from an artillery battery about 600 metres that way that they're under attack from Iraqi soldiers on foot. These Marines have moved into position, and these Cobra helicopters are firing Gatling guns and rockets at the Iraqi soldiers.
You can only get accepted by chemistry. You know, if you have a good bond with somebody, only then will they let you in. What these guys are doing out there, and men and women, it's just absolutely extraordinary. If you are a cheerleader of our perspective, that we deserve peace and that we deserve human dignity, these guys are really going out on a limb and risk their own life.
You've obviously got to be constantly aware of the fact that the unit that you're with is going to be giving you the line that makes them look the best, look good in the eyes of the public. As long as you're aware of that, then you can begin to try and tell whatever story you're trying to tell in as objective way as you can, bearing in mind the fact that the unit that you're with is feeding you, clothing you, protecting you, whatever. When I would approach someone high up in the unit for information on casualties or whether it was friendly fire or not, they would volunteer the information, but they never handed anything to me like that on a plate.
Do I think we got too close to them? No. I have seen reporters who cover the White House over the years sleep with women in this president's White House and that president's White House. That's incestuous. That's too close. That didn't happen with the Army.
On board the helicopter, an electric atmosphere. These men, pumped up by Iraq, Scud attacks in the desert, and by news of intense fighting. They were ready to hit back hard. We have just this second crossed over the border into Iraq, We'll be landing at our target in about 10 minutes' time into Iraq, and a smell.
Some wore uniforms, some didn't.
It's a very symbolic little statement I was making, but it did say, I'm not a soldier. Some of my colleagues didn't do that, and I think they crossed a line there.
I think it's difficult not to be enthusiastic about what you're doing if you're out there with our soldiers.
We bomb them. You know, it's cool to me because I like explosions and stuff like that, but like, I don't get to see the actual explosion, and that's what I want to see. But I guess when we get closer to Baghdad, we'll get to see more of that stuff, so.
Embeds and their protectors agreed a set of rules, not giving away battle positions or unit strengths in return for access. Sometimes when things got rough, journalists came under pressure to help out.
I was pretty scared at this stage, and we get to the bridge, and there are bullets flying all over the place, and I can see the tension in the face of the troops, the Marines that we're with. I can see the tension in their face as we get to this bridge.
The rocket-propelled grenade just misses us.
There's bullets flying everywhere. We get out of the Land Rover, and we hide in a ditch. One of the Marines said, "Why don't you make yourself useful?" And he's throwing these flares at me. And he's throwing the flares at me, and I'm throwing them at the guy who's got to light them and send them off into the sky. And I'm thinking, what am I doing here?
Tension was particularly high on the eve of war. Some journalists assembling with the British forces in Kuwait were ordered not to report what they saw.
We were not allowed to take any pictures or describe British soldiers carrying guns. I was told that there was a decision made by Downing Street that the military minders of the journalists down there were to go to any length to not portray the British fighting men and women as fighters. They wanted them there to have them there as nation builders, that they weren't going to be killing people. The media minders would get very, very upset with you very fast, and threats were leveled against you. That you would be disembedded.
Sometimes embedded reporters did send dispatches that put their military hosts in a bad light. This Australian report is of a jumpy US patrol killing 3 civilians after mistakenly thinking they'd come under enemy fire. When they needed to send out more positive images, they shot footage themselves and handed it to the networks. Iraqi soldiers surrendering. Message, the regime is crumbling. A friendly football match with the troops in Basra. Ordinary Iraqis are warming to us. A parachute drop in the north. Militarily insignificant, but good TV. Message, the advance is not bogged down. So stage 1 of the media campaign was to get up close and personal. Maximum imagery, minimum insight. Stage 2, CENTCOM, a shed in the desert. This was where the big picture was to be provided.
Oh, I hear them arguing. It's said both ways, Harry. Qatar, Qataris. CBS policy has decided Qatar. Spit it out. Spit it away.
This was supposed to be the stage for the context, the explanation, the sifting of facts.
The president says today is the moment of truth for the UN. His strongest indication yet that war may be just a few days away.
More than 700 journalists arrive at Central Command, a series of prefabricated huts just past an industrial estate in Doha, capital of the Gulf state of Qatar.
It had this moon feeling to it. In effect, everybody spent 12 or 14 or 16 hours a day in a warehouse.
Their job is to report every word of the US and UK military, even though they're hundreds of miles away from the action. They're here to be drip-fed information. They're supposed to get the inside track to help make sense of the reports the embeds send in from the front line. In reality, they spend their long days catching the news off TV, like viewers back home.
The only window that you had into actually what was going on in the war were that there were a set of television monitors in front of the coffee bar, and you could lean against the coffee bar and look up at the monitors and see at least what Fox was telling you was going on in the war.
The main event is the 2 p.m. press conference, officially the Freedom Briefing, timed for breakfast shows back in the US. Each day begins with a film and slideshow presented by General Vincent Brooks, a man destined to become a household face.
I have key weapon systems videos of recent engagements.
Every day, the war is on track. Successes are dwelt on, setbacks glossed over.
The coalition is up to the challenge, and more than ever, the outcome is not in doubt. I'm ready for your questions.
This is mainly an American show. The favored US networks receive the best seats. Allies next, then the rest. The spin doctors watch from the sidelines. On the left, Jim Wilkinson, the man from the White House. Next to him in civvies, Simon Wren, on a mission from Downing Street. Brits and Americans fighting the real battle and the media battle shoulder to shoulder. At least that's the plan.
Only be made by people on the ground. So I don't have anything else that I can give you real detail on that, and I appreciate the question.
There's a daily conference call that has Tory Clark at the Office of Secretary of Defense. You have the State Department, Number 10, the Foreign Office, the UN, the White House, Qatar, and others on there, and the United Kingdom's on that call. And so just any number of mechanisms. And we found that, you know, if you're talking often, you never let the press come between you, which is important.
The machine must be fed. Rolling news channels are hungry all the time. The idea is to coordinate the message across all time zones.
It's a 24-hour news cycle. And so you start with the strategy of, if you're on the air, they're not.
The genial frontman for the British journalist is Group Commander Al Lockwood. He begins his day at the early morning briefing, where raw intelligence and overnight news are discussed. His job is to select what's useful. He's already had his fingers burnt.
First day. Very quickly, the first American interview, he was asked.
Yeah, said to me, off camera, afterwards, how long are your records going to last? And I said, well, I'm not a betting man. And I made a glib remark about 3 or 4 days. I was being flippant about, and bang, by the time I got back in the office, UK spokesman says, war will not last longer than 3 to 4 days. And I went, oh dear. Anyway, I went down to the headquarters, confessed to Air Marshal Burridge that I've just made a stupid mistake. I thought something was being, you know, should have been, which was meant in jest, has been taken otherwise. So. Anyway, he said, well, you've learned on day one.
Are we sure yet whether a chemical alley is dead or not?
Yes, no, we know one of his bodyguards is on the basis of the things that actually doesn't make any difference if it's one way or the other.
Journalists and briefers, together. Rule number 1 of spin, keep off certain issues. In the British back office, a list of troublesome subjects, what they quaintly call poo traps. Beware questions on faulty kit. Beware DU, depleted uranium. Rule number 2.
Hi Paul, how are you this morning?
Hone the message and stick to it.
We are not interested in Saddam Hussein per se. People are making a little too much of Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein is just one member of the regime. At the end of the day, when you try to make a news story out of whatever happens here, you still have to use their message track, the one thing they're going to answer to every single question, and it has gone on every single day.
It takes little over a week for reporters to realize CENTCOM is not the plum posting that was promised. Facts and context are in short supply. Questions are rationed. Follow-ups are frowned on. Full answers are not forthcoming.
No, I can't confirm that. I think it would be unfair to speculate anything more than that.
No one can ever predict exactly how a battle will unfold. It's too early, to be able to say exactly what happened at that site. We've seen a number of things that tell us that what meets the eye always is not necessarily what's true.
What's going on is you're not even getting basic information that you need. As I said, they're not talking to us. They're talking to audience beyond us. and we're just conduit. Audience is in TV land, and we're in Never Never land.
Every day, every hour, whatever you knew had begun to degrade, and so you knew less and less, and somewhere at the end of your stay in Doha, you would know absolutely nothing.
Real information, what there is of it, is usually given away from the podium and away from the cameras. Behind this pack of British reporters, Number 10's Simon Wren is briefing a line. Other non-attributable lines during the war found their way into newspapers as fact. Saddam Hussein is dead. Tariq Aziz has defected. Military successes were briefed even before they happened.
Coalition troops push deeper into Iraq. They say they're now halfway to Baghdad. Iraq's second city, Basra, is reported secured, but after fierce fighting...
In fact, Basra fell 17 days later. As for Qasr, that seemed to fall every day.
In the past half hour, we've heard that British and American troops have captured the Iraqi border town of Qasr.
Cobra helicopter gunships hovered menacingly in the air, but their advance was slower than they'd been hoping for.
Coalition forces did capture it and do control the port of Qasr.
The Americans claimed to have taken this town on Friday. Yet, 3 days later, they were still facing fierce resistance here.
I want to make note of the UK forces today for their rapid progress in establishing security in the town of Qasr.
After 5 days, Qasr was finally taken. Were stories like these wishful thinking, overeager commanders, overeager journalists, or more than that? When Basra refused to fall, the British told the world of an uprising. There's a cycle. It starts as raw information on the ground.
My reports have been coming from the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards battle group headquarters, and there they reported this uprising. They reported an uprising amongst public there that was being put down by Iraqi troops actually in the city centre.
This is then given credence by spokesmen at CENTCOM.
And of course, this is just the sort of encouraging indication that we have been looking for.
By the evening news, the story has hardened further.
Gunners from the Royal Horse Artillery have been firing in support of a popular uprising here.
The story dovetails with a propaganda leaflet campaign on the ground, and this appeal to Iraqis from the Prime Minister.
And my message to them today is that this time we will not let you down. Saddam and his regime will be removed.
2 objectives for the price of 1. Back home, public opinion is rallied. In Iraq, a domino effect is created.
So if word comes out in CENTCOM that there's an uprising against Saddam's regime, well, certainly they can be thinking, planning, hoping that that information will be then picked up on, and it'll be, and then the local people will build on that, and the idea will become reality, even if it never existed in the first place.
I think actually most people will have known that Qasr didn't fall when it was first suggested it had, and will have known there wasn't an uprising in Basra. So I think actually over a course of time, the way that people watch and listen and gather their information, they will have discovered what was true and what wasn't.
Basra uprising, I believe still at this stage that something happened there, but it was seen as an uprising. We briefed it that there had been civil disturbance and it could have been an uprising, and we're very hesitant about it.
We passed burnt-out cars and the clothes left behind by Iraqi soldiers who'd either fled the battlefield or surrendered.
With embedded journalists seeing the battle in microcosm, with reliable information hard to come by at CENTCOM, the truth was proving elusive. There were a few journalists trying to find out for themselves what was really going on, but theirs was a dangerous game.
A deserted lookout post. This, until a few hours ago, was an Iraqi frontline stronghold. Nothing much to see, just a couple of porter cabins where the Iraqi flag still flies. But
we were a roving team. That means a team that is not embedded, but works independently. Our task was to go for the human interest story. Try to find Iraqi people, talk to them, try to find out from them what is going on. There was a team decision based on the information we had that we would try to go direction Basra.
They were only on that road because they'd heard the reports that their original destination, Qasr, had fallen. Reports that turned out to be false.
Firing started from exactly that position, coming from the American tanks. The front window went straight away, and that same moment, I don't know how I did it, but I went with my head under the steering wheel. I can't even do it now, but I went in there. It's probably why I got the blue eye. So I protected myself, and I kept on driving, and I looked to the right, and Terry's gone.
Terry Lloyd was one of 10 journalists killed in action. 2 of his colleagues are still missing.
Editorially and objectively, I would much sooner have been able to operate independently to a greater extent than we did, but on safety grounds it simply wasn't possible.
What was the role then of the unilaterals?
They were a pain in our rear a lot of times. Many of them were wounded, some killed. They would show up on the battle space despite our warnings.
Coping with bad news stories is the toughest test of all. A street market in the Shard district of Baghdad. Unexplained explosions kill 14. People blame the Americans, not the sort of image Downing Street and the Pentagon had in mind. Journalists here had Iraqi minders and were outside the control of coalition media managers.
What's impossible to say now is what could possibly have been a military target in such a populated area.
The story emerging on the ground points to a stray American missile attack on a day when sandstorms could have interfered with targeting. Many of the dead were working on cars in workshops. Survivors told us how they saw a plane and 2 impacts on either side of the road, consistent with an Allied attack.
When the 2 rockets fell near here, someone who was working under his car was crushed and burned. And then there were 4 others. They died as well when their cars caught fire.
Several people talked of hearing the aircraft. I'd heard a plane shortly before this. There was no doubt in my mind that the pieces of shrapnel, the equidistant craters, it was clearly an American or British aircraft which fired missiles into what in effect is a marketplace.
An awkward moment for CENTCOM. It's on the defensive. It reacts slowly at first.
Iraq is reporting today that there was a missile attack on a residential section of Baghdad that killed 14 civilians. Can you confirm that and tell us what went wrong?
Well, first, I'm not aware of. I've heard this report that you're saying it's in the media right now. We don't have a report that corroborates that, and so I can't confirm it.
Then a blanket denial. The Allies are not killing civilians. Another look at that British list of traps shows bombing accuracy and the market bombings at numbers 5 and 7.
Many hundreds of civil Iraqians have been killed by coalition bombs. Well, do you think that it will help Iraqi people to believe you and to trust you, to believe that you are coming to emancipate them?
Well, thank you for the question. First, I don't accept the premise of the question, which says that the civilians have been killed by coalition bombs. I just don't accept that.
Some reporters at CENTCOM don't buy this line.
When will you show us pictures of what happens when precision bombs don't go where they're supposed to, when they fail to hit their designated targets, or if they fail to go off at all? And if you don't, doesn't that expose you to the charge that this is more propaganda than truth?
Next day, Brooks goes on the offensive. He coordinates a new message with London and Washington. It was the Iraqis who did it.
They're also using very old stocks, we've discovered. And those stocks are not reliable, and missiles are going up and coming down. So we think it's entirely possible that this may have been, in fact, an Iraqi missile that either went up and came down, or, given the behaviors of the regime lately, it may have been a deliberate attack inside of town.
The Allies still deny causing the deaths, but awkward questions about this and a second market bombing 2 days later, from where US missile parts were recovered, are left unanswered.
96214AH.
The British government cast doubt on the reliability of the journalists. It says any information that isn't official should be treated with suspicion.
What is important about this is that all of us should look very sceptically at these kinds of reports, relying only on known and agreed facts.
End of story. The lack of hard facts prompts some journalists to leave CENTCOM and one to rebel.
On a more consistent basis.
My final question, after which I was not allowed to ask any more questions, was the question that every reporter was asking, not just every day, but literally every minute, which is, why should we stay? What's the value to us for what we learn at this $1 million press center.
I've gotten applause already. That's wonderful. I appreciate that. First, I would say it's your choice. We want to provide information that's truthful from the operational headquarters that is running this war.
I was approached by this guy by the name of Wilkinson. He was sort of the uber civilian. Also, he was wearing a uniform. I said, which was odd. And I said, "Aren't you a civilian?" And he said, "Yes, but I'm in the reserves." And I said, "But you're not here in the reserves." "Right." He said, "Right." So I said, "So you're a kind of a paramilitary." So we got immediately off to the wrong foot. If we had not already been completely on the wrong foot, now we were.
I'm a big boy, as they say in Texas. This ain't my first rodeo. And when reporters start signing my checks, then great. General Frank signs my check, and I make news based on his terms.
He said, "This is war, asshole." He said, "Don't around with things you don't understand." And then finally it was, "No more questions for you. Why don't you just go home?"
Snapshots from the front line, media management at Central Command. This twin track was especially important to the coalition in its search for weapons of mass destruction. Any evidence would do, especially for Tony Blair, who time and again cited Saddam's arsenal as the main reason for going to war.
The history of Saddam and weapons of mass destruction is not American or British propaganda. The history and the present threat are real.
Journalists at CENTCOM are given vague lines about chemical weapons on an almost daily basis, without any sign of a smoking gun.
Having chemical weapons.
Well, it hasn't been found. We're reminded that because we haven't found it, it's still there.
Wouldn't it have happened by now? And since it hasn't happened, wouldn't it be reasonable for some people to conclude that they didn't have them or weren't willing to use them?
Well, some might come to that conclusion. We don't.
Well, they were desperate to find something that they could hail as evidence of Saddam's intention to hit us with weapons of mass destruction. After all, without that, the whole justification of the war started to fall apart.
A paramilitary training facility.
Embedded journalists, meanwhile, are led to any and every site that might contain suspicious substances. The allegation is instantly reported and beamed around the world.
What did it suggest to you that the coalition forces were trying to do in getting those stories out?
Well, it could have been the journalists. They were embedded, as the term was, and they were eager to write a story, I suppose, and they were close to the event, so they would say, well, here may be something that's appetizing. And when they looked at it more closely, it turned out practically zero.
Several weeks after the facility was finished, and after they actually arrested the key players in Saddam's military apparatus, they still have not provided a credible weapon of mass destruction. And it becomes increasingly hard to believe that they are going to be able to find such a capacity.
Does it matter anymore? Opinion polls in the US show the war was a success, even if weapons of mass destruction aren't found. Tony Blair is benefiting from the so-called Baghdad bounce. Those responsible for the media campaign are reflecting on a battle well fought.
If some people didn't like the way we handled it, I think it was one part of just a plain case of too bad, and the second part of probably a little envy by some that they didn't get embedded, because the real superstars of this war were those media journalists who were embedded.
The Brits at least tried to get on with the journalists. They might be satisfied with the overall presentation of the war, but they're furious about the Doha operation. So much so that Simon Wren, number 10's man in Doha, has written a confidential note to Alistair Campbell, complaining that the American briefers weren't up to the job. He described the Jessica Lynch presentation as embarrassing. He complained that for the first 3 days of the war, the Americans locked themselves in their offices.
Having lost the first skirmish, they'd pretty much lost the war when it came to media support. And albeit things have got better and everything came to conclusion quite rapidly, to my feelings is that they lost their initial part of the campaign, and they never got on the front foot again. The media advisor we had here was an expert in his field. His counterpart on the US side was evasive, was not around as much as he should have been when it came to talking to the media. And in reality, what happened was that you had two different styles of news media management. and I feel fortunate to have been part of the UK one.
Carter's never designed to be the font of all news. The font of all news was designed to be the front lines of their embeds, and it worked out. We couldn't be happier.
Such wounds will heal. Washington and London now have a plan for future wars. As the Pentagon made clear, the perception of war affects its cost and duration. Now the media have their designated positions, close up in the front for action shots or tied up in the rear for the not-so-big picture.
I think embeds undoubtedly are the future. There's no question from the military point of view that they provided them with, a kind of a level and quantity of picture which was overall advantageous to them.
But you don't get anything else from that. You only get their view on the situation, and at least the independents can try to report on what really is going on, talk to the people.
Are you worried that embeds will be the future?
I think if we got to a position where embeds were the only form of conflict coverage that was possible, then it would be very one-sided and you wouldn't get the full picture of what was happening, and that obviously worries me journalistically, yes.
Let them do it. Let the army do it. Just put a colonel there and give a soldier a camera, and he can say what's happening